Just this week, I've been asked the same question 5 times, and that's should I be doing the ACER practice material timed or untimed? Now, this is something that I really strongly believe in and something I see a lot of people getting wrong. So I thought I'd make a video today sharing my opinion on what you should be doing. Now, the short answer is do it untimed. I really don't understand this. If you can't do something, why would you try to do something faster? If you're learning to ride a bike, do you try to ride the bike as fast as you can? If you're learning to write, do you try to write the entire page very quickly? No, you take your time and you make sure you can get it right, and then you try to add complexity later on. And solving GAMSAT problems is like any skill. It seems like a silly analogy to draw, but it is a skill. And if you're practicing a skill, you need to be able to get it right before you can do it quickly. Now, whenever I say this to people, inevitably I get the pushback of, but what about simulating exam conditions? And I'd really like to talk about this actually, because let's think about the actual exam, what's going to happen. Most people can't solve every single question in the allocated time. So why is that simulating exam conditions? Why is sitting down with 10 questions and giving yourself 90 seconds per question or something? How is that simulating exam conditions? Because you know yourself that you're not going to be able to answer every single question in the allocated time. So why are you giving yourself the average time per question? It just doesn't make sense. And even if you could answer every single question in the allocated time, you know that some questions are going to take longer than others. So again, if you're giving yourself a really small sample size, then you're just jeopardizing your chance of actually getting them right. And you're not identifying things that you need to go and learn or little gaps that you need to fill. You're just basically continuously making the same mistakes again and again and again, but you're just doing it in 90 seconds. And you don't need to be able to answer every single question correctly to get a really good mark on the GAMSAT. A lot of people don't answer 100% of the questions and they still can score in the 70s. So you shouldn't really be aiming for that. And if I could just say to you that you could go into the exam tomorrow and guaranteed you could answer 50% of the questions correctly, but you needed to spend the entire time on those questions and that's all you get. Would you take that? Or do you think it would be better, instead of spending your time on half the questions but guaranteeing you get them right, spreading your time evenly across all the questions and rushing and making mistakes and probably, well, actually, certainly getting a lower number of questions correctly, because those ones that you guaranteed you could have got right, you've essentially now just guessed them as well and made enough mistakes because by definition, you haven't given yourself enough time to solve them. And if we're talking about saving time, let's say that you needed 2 minutes to answer a question correctly, and you only gave yourself 90 seconds because of some arbitrary average time per question. And then because you shaved off those 30 seconds, you think, oh, great, I've saved myself 30 seconds, but you actually miss a trap. And we know that GAMSAT questions are full of traps. So you've actually now wasted 90 seconds to potentially save 30 because you've entirely wasted because you got the question wrong because you've missed the trap. And if you actually just took that 30 seconds, you would actually be further ahead because you've recognized the trap and now you're going to get the question right. Now, the other benefit of this is that it's almost certain, I'm not going to say it's 100% certain, but all of these psychometric tests use some kind of variation of this thing called item response theory to mark their exams. And it's heavily thought that ACER does the same to mark the GAMSAT. Now, I've made a video on item response theory previously, so I'll link that in the video somewhere. But essentially what it is it rewards you for getting more questions right in a STEM, because that to the algorithm shows that you have a deeper understanding of that topic. So for example, if we had 2 STEMs, both of them were 5 questions each. If I scored 5 questions right on one STEM and 0 right on the other, I would score higher than someone who scored 2 questions right, 2 out of 5 on one STEM and 3 out of 5 on the other, despite both of us getting 5 out of 10 Right, because I would have shown a really deep understanding of whatever topic that was, whereas you've just kind of showed a moderate understanding of both of them. So because of the item response theory, it actually rewards you getting more questions right within a STEM rather than the actual raw number of questions that you get correct. So this feeds back into what I was saying before, is we want to maximize how many stems we get correct. So I don't care if it takes 20 minutes or 5 minutes per question. If I know that I have a really good chance of solving a stem, I'm going to spend as much time as it takes on that stem. And if that means I don't get to another stem and I have to just guess all of those, that's fine. Because the alternative is I don't spend enough time on this stem, so I'm essentially guessing it anyway, and then I'm not going to have enough time to solve that stem later on, and I'm going to guess that one too. So we don't want to be guessing stems. We want to be prioritizing the stems that we can solve. And my mentality on it is, if you think you can see a way to get the solution, just spend as much time as it takes to get that solution. So if we're talking about doing the ACER practice material timed to simulate exam conditions, by giving yourself, let's say you've got 10 questions and you give yourself 90 seconds per question, that's not simulating exam conditions, because that's not what you should be doing. You should be looking at a stem and just asking yourself, can you solve it or can't you solve it? And if you can, then you spend as much time as possible on that stem. And if you can't, you skip it. And that's exactly the approach that I took to the exam. And I found it was really useful, because there's always going to be those stems that you just know you can't do. Just it's not clicking, you're not seeing the solution, you have no idea what you could even try. So just don't waste time on it and spend that time on other questions where you actually think you can solve it, or you have solved it and you're worried that you might have fallen for a trap. And spending that little bit of extra time might actually help you find that. And that's actually exactly what I did on my exam. So I went through the entire exam, and just on the first question, if I didn't know the first question of a stem, I'd just skip the whole stem, because of the item response theory, if I don't know that first one, it's kind of useless. That even if I somehow got the other ones, it's not going to be worth as much anyway. So I went through the exam, and all of the stems that I felt that I saw a solution for, I just did, and I spent as much time as required to solve those problems. And because I'd actually gone through and skipped several stems, I had a lot of time at the end. And the first thing I did was go back over all of those stems that I'd already completed to make sure I hadn't made any silly mistakes. And sure enough, I'd actually made about 3 or 4. And it's just that fresh pair of eyes. You see these mistakes that you missed the first time, that little piece of information that changes things. I'm not recalculating anything or anything like that, but just looking for anything that might make my answers incorrect. And after I'd verified that all of the stems that I was confident in were as correct as possible, then I just dedicated however much time I had left to those stems that I'd skipped. But I already felt that I probably didn't even get those right, but in my mind, it didn't matter, because I was maximizing the number that I could do. Yes, it wasn't 100% of the questions in the exam, but it was the maximum number of correct stems that I could do. So if you still feel really strongly about trying to simulate the exam and getting that timed practice in, why not give yourself 30 minutes and a full practice exam? So rather than confining yourself to 10 questions that you have to do in 25 minutes or something, give yourself the same amount of time, but open it up to any question. And you can just go to that question and ask yourself, can I solve this? Can I not solve it? And if you can, then give it a crack. And if not, you skip it. And that will give you a far better expectation of how many questions you could actually expect to get correct on exam day. And I think it's just a really slight change of mindset. You're just going from, instead of limiting myself to these questions in this time, I'm seeing how many questions in an unlimited number of questions I could actually solve accurately. So I hope that's helpful for you guys. And for God's sake, stop asking me if you should be doing timed practice or not. I'm kidding, kind of, but Really, I just think this is something that a lot of people get wrong. So just make sure, in my opinion, I think you should be doing all your practice untimed and just working out how to actually solve the problems. But if you insist that you really want to get that timed practice in, just flip the script and give yourself a set amount of time and an unlimited number of questions and see how many you can solve, because that's the approach that you should be taking on exam day. So by doing that, you're actually going to be simulating exam conditions a lot better. If you found this video useful, please like and subscribe. Otherwise, I'll see you in the next one.